everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, October 9th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to get into the Week 7 picks that I have, and we'll start with LSU Ole Miss. Going to be an incredible game down there in Baton Rouge, one that is incredibly hard to get a beat on. And then we'll get to the Red River Showdown between Texas and OU. Going to be a really fun game. One of those games that, frankly, you can really throw out the record book. Sometimes those people a little bit exaggerate how much that's the case, but in this one, you very much can. It's pretty much just whoever wants it more. Then we'll get into a little bit of an SEC roundup. We'll get to Alabama and Tennessee. They're kind of trying to bounce back after really tough losses, and I think they got a couple of games that could cause them a little bit of trouble, and I'll get into that in the third segment. Then we'll just get into the top 10 teams. What do they have to do this upcoming weekend? Who are they playing, and what is the one thing that we really want to see from them this upcoming weekend? Then we'll get some questions coming into Week 7, all the different things to break down, especially just how good this slate is, and if it is it the best slate that we've seen in quite some time. But before we jump in, I apologize for that. Get a little sneak peek for the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the Super Chat feature. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can add any question, comment you'd like, and then it'll pop up on the screen. We can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that as you please. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is still up and running, and that does the exact same thing. So either of those that you'd like to use, you're more than welcome. But let's jump into this, because this one is a nightmare. This is a very, very tough game to get a beat on, because frankly, I don't know if any of y'all have a very good beat on who these teams are, but I very much do not. I think they're kind of all over the place. They played some really good games. They played some not so good games. And LSU's a little bit easier to wrap your head around, but at the end of the day, I still think they have a number of places they can go over the next little bit, and it'll be really interesting to watch this one unfold. There's no two ways about that. That over-under is very high, and it probably should be. These are two elite offenses, and Ole Miss does have to find themselves just a little bit on that side of the ball, but I tend to believe they will against this LSU defense. All of this stuff is absolutely incredible in the SEC this upcoming weekend, and really the next 2 weekends, but this is a really interesting game because both these teams have taken a loss at this point in the season. Obviously, LSU has a little bit more breathing room with their loss being out of conference, but the reality is, I don't think there's a world where either of these teams compete for the SEC, get into the playoff without winning this game. So I think this game, weirdly, has become a must-win when, if they both walked in undefeated, probably wouldn't be for these teams. Obviously, it would still be a huge game, but that's the reality of the sport right now. I think neither of these teams is going to be able to make it the rest of the way without at least one more loss, and you can't go the rest of the way with 2 on the schedule. So you got to make sure that you win this one, and whoever does is in a very good place to possibly make a run of the CFP going forward. And I think the big-time question here is, what is Ole Miss on offense, and who can make the bigger plays on defense, right? You have to see, what Ole Miss is really going to do. It sounds like Trey Harris' status is really up in the air, so definitely something to watch there. But the reality is figuring out what this team is, figuring out how they respond, because that's the funniest thing about this is they were able to respond against South Carolina, and they deserve a ton of respect for doing that, obviously. But the reality is, this is the week where you're really going to get tested. This is the week where you're really going to have to respond more than anything else. And sometimes you'll see a team get that big-time win after a tough loss and then take their foot just a little bit off the gas pedal. I tend to believe that's not going to be the case with Ole Miss, especially with the opponent they're playing, but that is a reality. So we're going to have to figure out what this team's really made of. And then for LSU, I think it's really about situational football, playing really good on third downs, offensive and defensively, red zone, and then just making enough plays at the end of the day. And then your O-line's got to work. Will Campbell, John Emery Jr., all of these guys are really coming into their own. Emory Jones, I keep confusing them. I apologize. Emory Jones Jr., very talented player. Both those guys have to be absolutely huge in this game. There's no two ways about that, and I believe Princio Manmielen is going to play in this game, so definitely something to watch there. If LSU can control the line of scrimmage, especially with their offensive line, could be a long day for that Ole Miss defense. But some players to watch, I think one of the bigger ones here is Juice Wells is going to be huge for this game. He is a guy that, obviously, with Trey Harris' status kind of being up in the air, he's going to be the number one wide receiver on the field, likely for Ole Miss this upcoming weekend. And last week, he had a couple of drops. He had a lot of people in his face after pretty much every single play. So maybe this takes the energy down just a little bit. Obviously, a tougher environment to play in. But at the end of the day, not playing against your former teammates definitely is going to make him feel a little bit better about this one. He has to be huge in this game. No two ways about that, regardless of if Trey Harris is on the field or not. that is not going to be 100% of Trey Harris. You have to get a lot from all these other guys, and Juice Wells is one of the few that can really make those big plays that Ole Miss is going to need. And then you got Sunshine Perkins. This is one of my favorite players in the entirety of the SEC because his athleticism is off the charts. He's absolutely incredible to watch out there. And frankly, when you play an LSU team that is going to utilize running backs in the pass game, that's going to play a lot of things over the middle of the field with tight ends and things of that nature, and also you're going to have to get to this quarterback if you want to actually disrupt this offense by any means. And this is the guy that can do all three of those things. He's absolutely huge for this team, and he's been kind of coming on the last couple of weeks. He's going to be a huge player in this game, and frankly, I think he's got to have his fingerprints all over it the same way like Qua Rousseau did against Georgia for them to really get this win and for them to feel really good about their defense in this game. Caden Durham has been incredible for LSU, and definitely a guy that coming in at the running back position as a freshman has really answered every single question you could possibly want for this kid. He has done everything the past couple of weeks, really has come on strong, and you're going to have to stop it if you're Ole Miss, because the reality is LSU's not an elite rushing team. If they can run the ball on you, you are not stopping this offense. I feel very confident saying that. So this is a guy that has to be huge for this LSU team, and if you can get a couple of big runs in this game, it might be tough for Ole Miss to really stop them. And then we got Deshaun Womack. This is one of the best edge rushers that LSU has, and frankly, LSU has a lot of really good edge rushers. Braden Swinson's another one that's absolutely incredible, but this is a kid that can totally change this game in a second. You know, you have Princely Emmanuel on the other side that can do the exact same, but you're going to have to get to Jackson Dart a time or two during this game, the same way that South Carolina wasn't able to last week. So you're going to have to get home, and I think they have a lot of guys to throw at them, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but how Ole Miss can win this game. The biggest thing to me is just get interior push, and it's for a number of different reasons, but obviously they're going to be tough to stop regardless. You're going to have to stop the run. That's just the reality. Now, you should be able to do that. If anything from the past couple of weeks shows us anything about LSU, that's probably the place you can stop this offense the most. But the reality is, even beyond the rush game, even beyond, stopping the run, because obviously that's a huge part of this game, moving Garrett Nussmeier off the spot is probably the most important part of this game for Ole Miss. When you talk about guys that can just rip the ball all over the field, Garrett Nussmeier is probably at least in the top 5. Frankly, I think if you give him a elite amount of time, it's pretty much him and Quinn Ewers in terms of pure throwers of the football. You got to move him off the spot. You got to get him out of the pocket, and then maybe you can get a couple mistakes. And then find your one-on-one matchups outside. This back end is not very great. They're relying on a very huge amount of young kids to make a lot of big-time plays. J.K. Johnson, Ashton Stamps, Major Burns all need to be huge players for them. And although you don't have Trey Harris, still find the matchups that you like. Still find Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, Caden Prescorn, and take advantage of these kids, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to win this one. You're going to have to be able to push the ball downfield, and you have a lot of receivers that can absolutely win one-on-ones. You just got to find them when they do. And then we'll get into LSU's running backs, because it's something we've talked about a little bit earlier on in this, but LSU's offense is impossible to stop in a million different ways. They are going to be so tough to really get a beat on and make sure that you can absolutely push forward and feel and feel really confident about what you're going to do. The reality is, if they're able to run the ball on top of what they can do in the pass game, you have no shot. That's just the reality. And Pete Golding can do as many beautiful things scheme-wise as he wants. They're going to be able to make the plays that they need to. There's no two ways about that. So you got to be able to stop the run, keep Caden Durham out of this game, and if you can do that, then you probably have a pretty good shot. The only way to stop this LSU offense really is to make them one-dimensional, and this would obviously go a long way to doing that. And then we got to get into LSU, and the biggest one is what we talked about a little bit ago. Give Garrett Nussmeier time. This kid is as dangerous as can be if he can stand in there and make the throw that he needs to make. While kept clean, 73.8, 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Pressure has not happened a lot with how good that offensive line is, so that's obviously another thing here, only giving up 2 sacks all year, and both were to South Carolina. So Ole Miss is going to have to get home a couple of times, and LSU, if you can give Garrett Nussmeier time, there's not a lot of defenses in the country that are going to be able to stop him. So keep him upright, make sure he can dissect the field, and then tear them to pieces, really. And then for LSU, you got to attack with a pass rush. Your back end is not necessarily good enough to keep up with these Ole Miss receivers day in, or down in, down out, if you're not going to be able to get to the quarterback quickly. If Jackson Dart is able to extend plays, have 3 seconds to pass the ball, Ole Miss is going to make a lot of big-time plays in this game. That's just the reality. So LSU has to get home. They have a ton of guys. Deshaun Womack, we talked about. Braden Swinson's an absolute beast. Savion Jones, Gio Paez, Gabriel Rilliford. absolutely for real. And it's going to be incredible to watch all of these guys rotate in, and you really got to keep them fresh to keep this thing going. And am I a believer in Ole Miss, Andre? It's a very interesting thing. I don't know yet. I think we'll find out this weekend how much of a believer I am, because frankly, right about now, I have a very little idea of what that team is going forward, how much they can really do this year, and I think we'll learn a lot on Saturday. No two ways about that. But the other thing for LSU is set this tone early. This is a non-Ole Miss team that if you let them out of sight, they will bury you. They will put up crazy amounts of points against this not-so-great defense, and it will be a really tough day for you. Now, if you can get on the front foot, if you can use those 15-play script, get a touchdown, go up 7-0, maybe go up 14-0, if you can get a big-time defensive play, you are going to be barreling downhill. And this LSU offense is nearly impossible to stop if you can get Garrett Nussmeier into a rhythm. So set the tone early, get a quick lead, get this crowd involved, and then things get really interesting on the other side of it. So this is an incredible game. If anyone has a very confident pick in this game, I will call you a liar, because the reality is this one's going to be off the charts crazy. It's going to be all over the place. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at where this game is going to be played, and I'm going to go LSU. I don't know. I think Ole Miss is probably the better football team. I'll be totally honest with you guys. But you factor in all of the different variables going into this one, the home field advantage, Ole Miss not necessarily being where I thought they would be at this point in the season, and kind of having a really suspect offensive line. It's going to make me a little bit nervous about this one. I just think LSU makes enough plays. I think it's going to be a really weird up and down game, and I think it's going to come down to the wire, as you can see. So it's going to be incredible to watch this one. I do think LSU is going to get it done. I think it's going to be a really crazy game, may even be the game of the Saturday. But at the end of the day, I think LSU gets it done. I think that home field advantage plays a huge part in this game, and Ole Miss just makes that one too many mistakes towards the end of this one, and LSU gets that win. So going to be incredible to watch that one. Frankly, I can see it going any which way you could possibly imagine, whether it's Ole Miss blowing them out, LSU blowing them out, either one of them winning a very close game. It's going to be incredible to watch that one unfold. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down the Texas OU game. This one's special. No two ways about that, and I'll give you my pick and breakdown right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down the LSU Ole Miss game. That one's going to be absolutely crazy. I do have LSU winning by a hair, but I think it's going to be one of those that absolutely comes down to the wire and could go any which way, honestly. But let's get into the Red River Showdown, because this one's awesome. There's no two ways about that. It is my favorite game in college football. It's my favorite rivalry, and frankly, it's one of those that we talk about in rivalry games often. We talk about how you got to throw the record books out. When these two meet, it totally doesn't, none of the past means anything. It matters what happens on that field at that very moment. Most of the time, that's not really the case, right? Most of the time, you can pretty much get an idea of how this game is going to go by what's happened the rest of the year. This is not one of those games. It is going to be absolutely insane. It's going to be all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason to this game other than who wants it more. That's the best that I can do of who really wins this game every year. And frankly, you can go back to 2015 when a 5-7 Texas beat a CFP-bound Oklahoma. That'll give you plenty of proof for that. So it's absolutely off the charts. It's my favorite game in college football, and it's going to be a special one. No two ways about that. I think this is going to be really, really crazy. And one of the big time things is it sounds like Malik Hawkins is going to be, obviously he's going to be the guy under center, and it's going to be a really, really tough thing for him. He's been under bright lights. He played against Tennessee in his first, game getting in there, and then went to Jordan-Hare to make his first start. So he's about as battle-tested as you could be as a 2-week starter. That being said, this is a totally different beast. He's walking into an absolute nightmare where you have a home field advantage on one side, then you drive 30 yards, and you're immediately in an away game. That is a totally different thing for a kid to deal with, and he's going to have to settle him down pretty quickly in this one. It does sound like Quinn Ewers will be back in this game. It sounds like he is going to go unless there's some crazy turn of events over the next couple of days, but he'd probably have to shake off some rust. Definitely a worry for Texas going into this one, but the reality is Sark does an incredible job of getting his guys into games, letting them shake off the rust early on in it, so not necessarily super worried about that playing a factor, but if Oklahoma can get to him early, then a lot of stuff changes. No two ways about that. The big thing to watch here is the OU O-line. It's not necessarily been downright bad. Let's be totally honest. Michael Hawkins has done a good job of kind of masking that issue a little bit and making them feel a little bit better about that, but the reality is it's a lot to ask for 4 quarters for them to hold up against this pass rush. Going to be really interesting to see how they play. If they play really well, if they play the best football they played all year, they have every chance to win this game. It's just going to be really tough to do that. And then for the defensive side for OU, where are the holes? Where are the openings to exploit? Tennessee did a solid job finding those openings here and there throughout that game, but there's not going to be a lot of them. Texas has to be very careful, not force anything, make sure you're not giving this OU defense a chance because they will take it and run with it. I can absolutely promise you that. And the Oklahoma team does have some injury issues going into this game, definitely something to watch. It sounds like Deion Burks will be back, but none other wide receivers. So they're going to have a lot of guys step up. We'll talk about one of those guys here in a second, but this is a special one. Really no two ways about it. It's going to be absolutely incredible to watch this one unfold, and I think when you look back at this Saturday, I think this is going to have plenty to do with how incredible this is. Now, a lot of people are picking Texas and picking them by a lot. No two ways about that, but when you watch this game, there's plenty of energy in it regardless of who's the favorite team and how much they're favored by. But a couple of players to watch. We talked about the wide receiver woes for Oklahoma. J.J. Hester needs to be the guy. He was the leading receiver against Auburn, stepped up in a huge way in that game, but even with Deion Burks back, he has to be a huge player for them. If they can't, confuse this Texas defense, if they let them key in on Deion Burks and Deion Burks only, they're going to get dominated. That's just the reality. They have to be able to spread the ball out, and J.J. Hester is a really good option to do that with. And then Jaden Jackson is huge for this game. This defensive line for Oklahoma is solid. It's not necessarily elite. And you're going up against a really good offensive line in Texas, so you're going to have to get some push inside. Not necessarily elite, not necessarily, dominating the trenches, but at least get enough to slow down this offensive attack. You're really good against the run, and a big reason has been Jaden Jackson coming along and then those ridiculous linebackers that they have on the back end. But the reality is, I do think this is one of those games where if Oklahoma can't stop the run, if they let Texas even get over 100 yards rushing, it's going to be a really tough day for them. No two ways about that. So got to be able to plug the inside, and Jaden Jackson's the big-time guy that could do that. And then I got to talk about DeAndre Moore for Texas. I think this is one of the most important players on that offense, bar none, and I think it's not necessarily because he catches all the passes. He's one of those guys that does such a good job in the slot position, just kind of taking people out of plays, just kind of making sure that everything outside of him is working perfectly, and he opens up spaces for so many receivers. And against a defense like Oklahoma, you got to be able to scheme guys open. You're not going to be able to just outright beat them one-on-one, so you're going to have to be able to scheme them open, and DeAndre Moore is as important for that as really anyone on this team, and then obviously can make a couple of big plays in the pass game as well. Anthony Hill, this is your game. That's the reality in this one. When you play someone like Michael Hawkins, when you play a team like Oklahoma that is going to be able to extend plays and make things dangerous for you on the back end, an athletic linebacker is exactly what you need, and Texas might have one of the best in the country. He's absolutely elite, one of those guys that is just all over the field pretty much every game, and he might just have to have the game of his life in this one. He might just have to play absolutely huge for this team and definitely keep all the pressure really off this back end, because this back end is absolutely played really, really good football. If they're forced into some tough positions where they have to, guard one-on-one, maybe it gets a little bit tougher for them, but Anthony Hill can kind of make that a little bit easier for everyone involved. So, huge player for Texas the rest of the season, but especially on Saturday, has to play absolutely massive for this team. How Oklahoma can pull off this upset, you got to get after Quinn Ewers early. He made a couple of mistakes early in last year's game, and that was really all the opening that OU needed in that game. It was one of those things where Texas probably outplayed them in the majority of the second half, but OU had built up an early lead and then made the finishing play. So that was kind of the difference in that game. If they can get after Quinn Ewers, especially after him coming off an injury, they might just have the energy that they very much need, and then you can go, just win this game normally. You don't necessarily have to play this game out of yourself or do anything special. If you get a couple of mistakes from Quinn Ewers early, then you can do a lot of things that you feel very comfortable with throughout this game. So huge for them to just kind of get that one mistake, get the momentum on their side, and then ride that the rest of the way. And then you have to get multiple in the run game. The reality is this is not a very good run game. If they go straight downhill at Texas, it's going to be really tough to deal with. It's going to be one of those things that Oklahoma's going to look up at halftime and only have 30 yards rushing, and they're going to have to figure out where they stand. But the reality is you can get pretty creative. Gavin Sawchuk, Javonte Barnes, Michael Hawkins, all really talented players, all guys that can do really dangerous things in the run game. You got to be able to give them time. You got to be able to give them openings, and this offensive line has to play really good football. That's really what this game comes down to for Oklahoma. So at the end of the day, what those five guys do up front is probably what Oklahoma's going to do in this game, and then make momentum plays. That's the reality of this one. Whenever you walk into a game as a 14-point underdog, especially in a rivalry game like this, you're going to need a couple of big ones. You're going to need a couple of big plays, a couple of turnovers, a couple of things that just get this crowd involved, totally silence the other side of the stadium, and make you feel a lot better about where you're at. So when you walk into a game like this, there's very little reality where Oklahoma is going to be able to walk in there, play their style of game, not go out of themselves at all, and not make any big-time plays in turnovers and that type of stuff and win this game. That's just probably not going to be the way it goes about business. Now, if OU can make a couple of those big-time momentum plays, a lot changes very quickly, obviously. So that's going to be a huge thing for this team, and if they can make those, then maybe we're looking up in the second half and OU is up by 7, up by 10, and Texas is trying to fight back. But on the Texas side of things, kind of going against what we said about Quinn Ewers, you got to get out in front in this game. The Texas team, punched Michigan in the teeth in the second game of the season, and that was absolutely huge. Frankly, that was probably where the game was won. It felt like that defense had absolutely no answer for this offense, and it really put them in a position where they kind of had to start forcing stuff on the other side of the ball. If Texas is leading in this game, if they're up 14-0 before OU can look up at the scoreboard, OU is going to start doing things that they're not super comfortable doing. They're going to start forcing the ball into some windows. They're going to start doing some things that are not necessarily the way they want to go about business, and that's when Texas defense will roll. So that's the reality. They need to get out in front. They need to play this game from the lead and get Quinn Ewers comfortable is another huge part of this, obviously. And then keep Michael Hawkins at home. Just make sure this kid does not get out of the pocket, because he is dynamic. He is so much fun to watch when he gets out of the pocket, and his time to throw, 3.38 seconds. So he can extend plays. It's not necessarily because his offensive line has been playing all that much better, but at the end of the day, he can definitely extend plays, and they very much need him to do that. He's also 27th in the country in quarterback scrambles. So he's absolutely going to be a guy that extends plays, that makes life difficult for you. If you keep him at home, if you keep him in the pocket, he's not going to beat you. That's just the reality of who he is right this second. He very much could develop into an elite passer, but probably not going to be in this game on Saturday. So he very much needs to get out of the pocket, and then Texas very much needs to keep him at home. If they force him to beat him with his arm, OU's not going to win this game. And then for Texas, mix up the tempo and the personnel groups. This really just is kind of an overarching thing for this Texas offense, frankly. Mix things up. This Oklahoma defense is far too good to be playing with fire the way that a lot of times they did last year. You have to make sure you rotate guys in, keep guys healthy, make sure that you're just kind of imposing your will from start to finish and playing around with a lot of different things, making Brent Venables a little bit uncomfortable, and that's the way you're really going to get this defense. You're not going to get them just playing them straight up, because they're a nightmare to deal with straight up. That's just the reality. So you're going to have to mix things up, whether that's tempo, personnel groupings, just play calls in general. You're going to have to play around with a lot of things if you're Texas, and then just hope that this Oklahoma defense shows you some gaps that you didn't necessarily see before. So this is an incredible game. It's my favorite game in college football. I don't see that changing anytime soon, frankly, because every time I watch it, I absolutely love something different about it, and it's as special as it possibly could be. I don't know if this one's going to be all that fun. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I do think Texas is going to win this game fairly comfortably. Now, Oklahoma has every ability to walk in there and get a win. I don't want people acting like, Texas is going to roll over them, and if they don't, it's an absolute failure. Walking into that Cotton Bowl is an absolute nightmare. There's so many different things that could happen in that game, and there's so many different things that could go wrong in that game for Texas that OU could find an opening. I mean, last year going into this game, whether it was right or not, probably not right. But at the end of the day, not a lot of people were giving Oklahoma a shot. They came out there and won the game. And then in 2015, if you want to go back and watch that game, those are two wildly different teams. And Texas somehow found a way to win. So at the end of the day, this one comes down to who's willing to lace them up, strap up their chin strap, and then go to work. That's the reality of this game. Who wants it more? Who's going to play a little bit harder? And who's going to make that one play? When everyone else is tired, who's going to run down that ball? Who's going to make that 50-50 play that totally changes this game? But at the end of the day, I don't know if it's going to really come down to that. I do think Texas is going to make the plays that they need to make. I do think they're going to play this one from the lead, and Oklahoma is just not going to have the offensive line that they need to have in this game to get this win. But it's going to be an incredible game. I absolutely love this game every single year. Cannot wait for it to get going, and it's going to be awesome. No two ways about that. It's just another addition to this incredible weekend, and we'll break down a couple more tomorrow when we have some big-time games. Obviously, Ohio State, Oregon will take the cake there, but we'll take our second break here, and Andre, we will actually talk about that Tennessee game. It's a little bit of a spot. We'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Texas OU game that's going to go down in the Cotton Bowl this upcoming weekend. One of the best games in college football, and it's going to be incredible to watch it in its new slot and its new conference in the SEC at 3:30. So going to be awesome to watch that one, but let's get into these two teams because Alabama and Tennessee have a ton to figure out this upcoming weekend, and they got a ton to prove to their fan bases. There's no two ways about that. So where do they go? How do they go about this? It's going to be a really interesting thing to watch as we move forward in this season, and Alabama has a very interesting one. You go on the road to South Carolina, a team that absolutely can get after the quarterback, absolutely can possibly take some of what Jalen Milroe does in the run game out of the game, and it'll be really interesting to see what Alabama's counter is on offense. Now, the reality is, when you talk about this game, you're very much looking at the defense. You're very much looking at what this Alabama defense is, and they kind of need to roll in this one. The South Carolina offense is good, don't get me wrong. They're not nearly good enough to keep Alabama out of place the same way Vanderbilt did, and frankly, if they are out of place the same way Vanderbilt was able to get them out of place, you got a problem if you're an Alabama fan. That's just the reality. They have to make sure that they roll in this game and play really, really good defense. And then on top of that, this is the game for Kalen DeBoer. This is the one where he proves everyone wrong, where he shows that he's an elite head coach, where he is able to bounce back the way that he necessarily wasn't able to last week. So definitely needs to figure out some stuff. And frankly, if he doesn't perform in this one, there will be a lot of Bama fans after him. That's just the reality of the position that he's in. But some players to watch. Rocket Sanders is probably back to full health this week. He was a little bit banged up against Ole Miss last week, and frankly, he's a huge player. He's someone that totally changes what that offense can be because you have to worry about the running back a little bit more than you have to worry about Lenore Sellers, and that opens up a lot of different things for that team. So very much need him back in this game, need to be able to get Alabama out of position the same way Diego Pavia did, and this is going to be a huge player to do that. And then we got Nick Emanwari. This guy's incredible. He's absolutely awesome to watch, makes so many plays on the outside for South Carolina, and frankly, he's going to see a lot of Ryan Williams on Saturday. There's no two ways about that. Now, some of that is position-based, some of that is matchup-based, depends on the system that you're in, but the reality is this kid's really, really good, and frankly, he is by far the best corner. I would be very surprised if he wasn't facing the by far best wide receiver on Alabama right about now, so it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold, a huge, huge matchup for this game. And then we got Justice Haynes. I need more from this Alabama run game. You have to give more to this pass game that's going to be as dangerous as anyone in the country. You can't get the run game going, then teams are absolutely going to have every ability to stop you. So have to get Justice Haynes going, have to get Jamarian Miller going, have got them going at different points, just not long enough, not as sustained as you really want it to be. So very much need to figure that out this upcoming weekend. And then you got Qual Rasad. This is an absolutely elite athlete in every sense of the word. Forced a fumble on Carson Beck in that Georgia game, and he needs to be all over the place. You talk about Lenora Sellers, he's going to cause a lot of problems for you. He's going to get out on that edge at least a couple of times, and you got to have a guy to chase him down, and this is probably the guy that's going to do that. Absolutely huge player for Alabama, and one of those guys that is just becoming a star before our eyes. Some keys to the game. Bama's headspace has to be number one, right? You talk about that week last week. That is something that Bama fans, Bama players have never experienced. They never expected they would experience, but now you got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off. We're going to figure out exactly what Kalen DeBoer's Alabama is really about this upcoming weekend, and I cannot wait to see what they're really about. Cannot wait to see just how they respond to all of the craziness of this past weekend. Also, the QB run game is going to be a factor here. Jalen Milroe is obviously dangerous. I don't think I have to tell you guys that, but they allowed Diego Pavia to get 56 yards. I know that doesn't sound crazy, but there were a couple of huge plays in that one, including that first down run to end the game. So they have to make sure Lenora Sellers just isn't a factor with his legs. If you keep him in the pocket, if you make sure that he's at home, he's not going to beat you, just plain and simple. That's not the way he plays football, so you're going to have to make sure that you keep him at home, keep this quarterback run game out of it, and whoever can do that better is going to have a really good shot to stop the other offense, and then the pass rush is going to be huge. Both these teams are very aggressive. Both have just elite athletes all over the field. They're absolutely awesome, and especially coming off the edge, both these teams have just dudes all over the place. But the reality is you got dudes that can evade. You got Jalen Milroe, you got Lenora Sellers, so whoever can put the quarterback on the ground more consistently is going to win this game, because both these guys, if they extend plays, are an absolute nightmare to deal with. So getting him on the ground is something that's going to be huge for this game, and frankly, I just think Alabama's going to be pissed off. I think they're going to be so mad. I think Malachi Moore in particular, there's a lot of talk around him. I've said my piece on that, but I think he's going to have his hair on fire. I think he's going to play incredible football, and although this defense, I don't necessarily love it, I think South Carolina will show that there's a couple of holes in this defense, and you probably won't feel all that much better if you're an Alabama fan for this defense going forward, but you'll get a win, you'll get back on the right track, and then you'll figure out all the other stuff later. And now we'll get to that game, Andre, because it's interesting. There's no two ways about that. Tennessee is favored by 15.5 in this one, and this is just really sketchy. Florida's coming into this one with nothing to lose. They officially are one of those teams that can just play football in front of them, not think about really anything else in the future, and just play the game that's right there. That is a dangerous thing to deal with, regardless of what you're coming off. Obviously, Tennessee has to be very focused in this game. Coming off a game where they had no business losing in a lot of different ways to Arkansas, they very much need to bounce back in this one. And they get them at home, which is absolutely huge. And this is just one of those things where you really have to see the Tennessee that we expected to see this year. You know, show the Tennessee that played NC State, that played Oklahoma, show the offense that is as explosive as anyone in the country. And frankly, if Tennessee cannot, roll in this game, if they can't put on display and make everyone feel really good about them, they're staring down UGA and Bama with possibly 2 losses on their schedule. And even if it's 1 loss, you still can't feel great if you don't roll in this game, don't feel, dominant in this game, and then we'll figure out what's on the other side. But it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold, and frankly, I think Florida has a fairly okay shot in this game. But a couple of players to watch. Chimere Dike is huge for this team. Florida doesn't necessarily have the elite wide receivers, especially with Trey Wilson kind of finding his way back from an injury. You need to find more guys, and this Tennessee defense, especially the back end, is pretty susceptible. There's a number of openings that you can expose. You can't do it with one wide receiver. So you can't just do it with Elijah Badger. You can't just do it with Trey Wilson. Very much need to get other guys involved, and Chimere Dike is making big-time strides this year. And then you got Shamar James. This is an absolutely elite player in every sense of the word. He is the best player on that Florida defense, and frankly, I think you look at this Tennessee offense, you can't beat them if they're not one-dimensional. You can't stop them if you can't slow down the runs, exactly what Arkansas did, or they stopped the pass, to be totally fair. But the reality is, I think when you talk about this Tennessee offense, they're not easy to stop in any respect, but when you can take away that run just a little bit more, you have a very good shot, and that's exactly what Shamar James and really that entire front seven is going to have to deal with on Saturday. And then you got a couple more. I think you talk about Tennessee. Mike Matthews is a player that I just want to see unlocked a little bit more. And frankly, they have plenty of receivers, so it's not necessarily that he has to, but it sounds like Squirrel White's a little bit up in the air. It sounds like a number of different things are a little bit up in the air for that wide receiver room right now. Mike Matthews very much needs to get involved. There's no two ways about that. He needs to be a huge player for this team going forward. And in this game, you have a little bit of an opening against a back end for Florida that's not necessarily elite by any means to maybe get those chances for a young player like Mike Matthews. Arian Carter's huge in this game because when you talk about a team like Florida, when you talk about a running back like Montrell Johnson, as dangerous as there is in the entire country, he has to be on alert at every single point in this game. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a little bit of a pass rusher in this game because you give Graham Mertz time, he is going to tear you to pieces. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but Graham Mertz is a very, very good thrower of the football and absolutely can do a lot of good things against this back end that has some questions to answer. No two ways about that. But keys to the game. What is Tennessee's offensive identity? Because I'm having a tough time figuring it out. It's not necessarily that they're totally changing the way they go about business. They're totally changing the calls that they make. I just don't know how much they want to put on the shoulders of Nico Iamaleava. I don't know how much they want to ask of him, and I don't know if they're able to run the ball effectively enough to not ask a lot of Nico Iamaleava. So a lot to figure out. They had 2 turnovers on down, 7 punts in the last game, so can't happen again. No two ways about that. And then protection is going to be huge. I talked about Graham Mertz. If he's given time, he can play really elite football. And then Nico, I don't even have to say that. He absolutely can. A very, very incredible player and one of those guys that you give him a second to just set his feet and rip one, you're probably not doing anything against that. That's just the reality. So whoever can protect their quarterback, keep them upright more, probably in a good position to win this game. And then Florida's mentality. We talked about it a little bit ago. Are they a team that has nothing to lose and are just playing free? Or are they a little bit nervous about every single move that they make? Are they worried that Billy Napier is going to get fired after this game? There's a million different things that Florida has to weigh pretty much every single week of the season. Now, they have every ability to handle that. I don't doubt that they can handle that, go into Tennessee and play really good football. It's just a really weird situation. It's going to be a fantastic kind of case study of what this looks like in a college football scale because probably not going to be the last time it happens where you feel pretty confident that a coach is out the door at the end of the season, but can't really do too much because of the schedule that we have in college football. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. And I think this game is going to give us a pretty good idea of what Florida is the rest of the season, at least from an energy perspective. But I do have Tennessee winning. I do think it's kind of a sketchy spot. Frankly, I think they might score late in this one to make it look a little bit better. But when I look at Florida right now, I think if they're not able to run the ball in this game, which I feel pretty confident they won't be able to do, it's going to be really hard to win this one. I think they have an ability to attack this back end, but frankly, if you can't get the run game going, if you let this pass rush get going, it's going to be a nightmare for you. So I think Tennessee makes enough plays. Now, I would put them on upset alert. No two ways about that. And I'll actually break down some of those tomorrow, so definitely tune in for that. But the reality is, this is one of those games that it's a little bit of a toss-up. I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly what Tennessee is going forward, and Florida's one of those teams that can kind of just throw stuff at the wall every single weekend and just hope that they get a win. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it's going to be pretty close in the fourth quarter, but I do think Tennessee makes that one play late in the game to get that win. But definitely a sketchy spot, Andre. No two ways about that. So it's going to be awesome to watch that game unfold. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we just got to talk about the top 10. We'll go through all the games these top 10 teams are playing and just what's the number one thing we need to see from these teams in this week. And if we don't see it, how worried about these teams are we going forward? So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about those two games where Alabama and Tennessee badly need to bounce back. If they can't bounce back, then we got a lot of questions about those teams going forward, especially with the schedules they got to play going forward. But let's get into all the top 10 teams. What do we need to see from these teams this upcoming weekend, especially after some fell this past weekend and got to find their footing again? So it's going to be incredible to watch this unfold. And we'll start with Texas. We broke down this game, so you know where I stand on it. I do think Texas is going to win. I do think Texas is going to control this one for the majority of this game, but I believe this is the biggest test that Texas has faced offensively. I understand if you have the argument for Michigan. I worry about that team's ability outside of the elite players on that team. I know the elite players on that team are insane. I know Will Johnson's wild, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, absolutely elite players. Outside of that, you can really attack that defense. I don't think Oklahoma gives you the same luxury. I don't think they give you the openings that Michigan gave Texas. So that back end is going to be tough to deal with. That linebacker of Danny Stutzman is the very best in the country. And that D-line, although not elite by any means, absolutely has the dudes to make plays. So Texas just got to run the offense. They have to be able to get Quinn Ewers rolling again, which is a huge thing in this game, but just run the offense that you've been running all year. Don't get outside of yourself. Don't play this game like it is a Super Bowl, which it definitely can feel like that when you walk into that stadium, but make sure you have your level head about you. Play the game that you played normally and don't necessarily get outside yourself, especially trying to get Quinn Ewers back into the rhythm. Just make sure you're playing the game in front of you and taking advantage of the few openings that Oklahoma's defense is going to give you. For Ohio State, Oregon, I can't wait for this game. I'll break it down tomorrow in more complete terms, but at the end of the day, I don't even know if I have a pick for this one yet. I'll be totally honest with you guys, but this one's huge, no two ways about that. I think the biggest thing I want to figure out about Ohio State, the biggest thing I want to see from Ohio State is just physicality. I think this Ohio State team is so good. I think they have a number of things that are going incredibly in their direction. The number one thing in this game that is not going in their direction is their offensive line against Oregon's defensive line. They have to be able to at least hold their own in that matchup. Don't necessarily have to outright win it or dominate by any means, but if they can't impose their will a little bit, if they can't get Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson running downhill, it's going to be a long day. And this by far going to be the toughest D-line they've faced thus far, so definitely going to be something to watch. The other thing I would watch is just the energy of this team. You know, Ohio State has not played that elite team going in the first couple of weeks. They have not been, as I like to put it so eloquently, they have not been punched in the mouth yet. They're going to get punched in the mouth in this game. I can absolutely promise you that. They will get punched in the mouth the second they run on the field because that fan base is going to go absolutely crazy. They need to make sure that stadium is, make sure that the structural integrity is checked on that stadium because it's going to be rocking. It might just collapse in on itself if you're not careful. So it's going to be absolutely crazy up there, and we'll find out if Ohio State can really punch back. And then that's the question here, Andre, is what is Oregon's physicality level? That's the biggest thing that I want to see from this team because it looks great, right? You look at the up and down the roster, you look at the measurables of this team, they're right up there with Ohio State, with Texas, with Georgia, Bama. They're absolutely incredible from a personnel perspective. These are the games where they kind of got bullied off the ball last year. That Washington game, Washington was able to run the ball very effectively. You have to make sure this Ohio State team stays behind the chains, does not get that run game going, because frankly, you're not stopping these two guys if they get running downhill. There's not a defense in the country that is stopping those guys running downhill. And absolutely, Jordan James has to be huge in this game. When you talk about Ohio State defense that is going to have just about every answer that you throw at it, having a running back that can have a huge game, him and Noah Whittington, having those two guys play a huge role in this game is going to be massive. So figuring out what this physicality is, also just figuring out who Dylan Gabriel is. He's going to get tested in this game the way he hasn't been in a while. I think that Texas game, he responded in a huge way at Oklahoma last year. This is going to be a huge test, and maybe definitely a bigger test than last year. So you're going to have to get ready for this one. If he can execute, then Oregon has every ability to win this game and be the outright national title favorite after this one. Then we got Penn State heading to USC, and this is a huge moment for this team. This is the one that you'll be defined by going forward. That's just the reality of that program going forward. And the biggest thing is I just got to see James Franklin. I got to see him be confident. I got to see him be calm. And I got to see him not make the mistakes that he has made in these big games in the past. So it kind of just comes down to what he can do on that day. I know Penn State is the better football team. I know Penn State has the more talented players on defense. I know they have a quarterback that I feel really confident in Drew Aller. I need to know that their coach is going to make the right plays. And frankly, I'm not so certain that Lincoln Riley is going to make the right plays. So that kind of plays a part here as well. But the reality is, I do think Penn State is plenty good enough to win this game. I think they're plenty good enough to win most of the games that they've lost over the last couple of years. So have to execute at an elite level. James Franklin has to probably coach one of his best games of his career, and we'll figure out exactly what this team is about on Saturday. Georgia played a weird game last week. They lost to Alabama, obviously, and then played South Carolina. Who'd they play? Played Auburn at home. My goodness. Played Auburn at home, and it didn't necessarily go the way you wanted to. If you're a Georgia fan, didn't necessarily roll out the way that you expected it to. You wanted to start fast. You wanted to, step on their throat and never let them go. That's not what happened. They could not get going. They could not necessarily do the things that they very much needed to do in this game, and frankly, if they can't get going on the run game, if they can't get things running downhill, it's going to be a nightmare for this team. I think Carson Beck is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. If he's not given the time that he very much needs, and if he's not given the run game that he needs, he's not going to be the elite quarterback that he's capable of being, and you're going to miss out on the playoff. That's the reality of that situation, and it's going to be interesting to watch that unfold. And Andre, frankly, I'd be surprised if they didn't throw a pick. Both those back ends are really, really elite, and Will Howard's been known to make that one weird mistake pretty much every game, so I expect at least one big defensive play on both sides, no doubt about that. But Alabama's an interesting one because you got a huge bounce back spot. No two ways about that. You have an opening to make some big time plays throughout the rest of the season. The biggest part is the defense. There's no two ways about that. And it's not necessarily, the personnel or putting another player in there that wasn't in there, because the personnel is elite. There's no two ways about that. You got to make sure you're not predictable, because you watch some of that tape. I believe it was Brooks Austin broke down some tape. It was absolutely incredible to watch. Vanderbilt had them in their pocket. There's no two ways. K. Womack got absolutely eaten for dinner in that game, and he's got to make sure that he's a little bit more unpredictable on Saturday, because South Carolina, although I don't think they're quite as good as Vanderbilt is, they have every ability to take advantage of you the same way Vanderbilt did, and you have to make sure that does not happen. So be a little bit more multiple. Have a number of things going for you. Have a lot of different, looks and just make sure you're making all the adjustments you need to make in this game. And then finally for them, the energy of this team is going to be fascinating to watch. It's the first time in the Kalen DeBoer era where they've really gotten knocked down. They had a number of things happen, the Malachi Moore blow up. They have a million things to think about that are not around football right about now. If they show up to that field, look absolutely steely-eyed and determined, and go to work on the South Carolina team, you feel pretty good going forward if you're an Alabama fan. No doubt about that. But there's a world where they come out just a little bit flat, a little bit defeated, and you figure out maybe Nick Saban was a huge part of this team. But we'll figure that out on Saturday. Going to be incredible to watch this team play on Saturday. But Tennessee's another one. And this one's another bounce-back spot. No two ways about that. But the offense is the problem, not the defense for this one. So you look at this, the biggest thing I want to say is get Nico a confidence boost that he badly needs. This is a rhythm thrower. This is a confidence thrower. He's someone that if you can get him going, he's going to be impossible to stop. Kind of like Garrett Nussmeier, kind of like Quinn Ewers, one of those guys that if you can get him the quick throws, the confident throws that he likes early on in this game, he could tear this Florida team to pieces, and he badly needs to. I think when you have this Tennessee team the rest of the season, there's not really a reality where they're in the playoff, where they're competing for the SEC, and Nico is not putting up really good numbers. He doesn't necessarily have to be elite, doesn't have to put up 400 yards per game. He does have to give them a little bit more, and they have to figure out exactly who he is, and this is going to be a good spot to figure it out. You're at home, but against a defense that you can attack, but also a game that a lot of people are going to have their eyes on. So it's going to be awesome to watch that one unfold, and if Nico can answer the bell, I'll feel a lot more confident about them going forward. And then you got Ole Miss, and this is a really interesting one. I've talked about this game, gave you my pick. I do think it's going to be LSU by an absolute hair, as close as you can possibly get this game. That's how close I think it's going to be. But I do think when you look at this Ole Miss team, the biggest thing I want to see is just show me you're a title team. Show me you're not going to be afraid walking into Death Valley, because frankly, there were a number of moments over the last couple of years where they walked into a road environment or played a really elite team, and they looked a little bit afraid. They looked a little bit hesitant. They looked a little bit slow to start that game, and that was pretty much all the other team needed. So walk into Death Valley unafraid. It's not an easy thing to do by any means, but if you can do that, then you very well could win a national title. And then the final thing, I want to see a show from Jackson Dart. I want to make sure that he's back on the role that he needs to be on for this team to succeed. And frankly, the last couple of weeks, he's been good. He's good against South Carolina. He was not so good against Kentucky. He has to make sure that he bounces back in a big way, and this would be the defense to do it against. There's no two ways about that. And then finally, Clemson made their way up into the top 10 this week, and they had a really nice week, just kind of getting a quick win while everyone else was fighting up top. But the reality is, I think the biggest thing you want to see from Clemson, kind of the rest of the way, but particularly in a game like this, roll. Just dominate them from the opening jump, just absolutely railroad Wake Forest in this game. I know it's something that they absolutely should have the ability to do, and frankly, I probably expect them to do it in this game, but it's one of those things that I watched the Florida State game, and I think I saw about 60% of what Clemson can be. I think I saw a little bit taken off of that game for Clemson. I want to see them flex their muscles just a little bit in this one. Not necessarily, keep their starters out there for the entire game or anything crazy, but at the end of the day, be up 35 points at halftime, not have to worry about the second half, and continue on your way to hopefully an 11-1 season, an ACC title, and we'll see what happens. But for me, it's more just about Clemson just being Clemson, dominating them the way they probably should dominate Wake Forest, and rolling in this one and continuing on their way. But it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold. I think you talk about the top 10 teams this week. This is probably the biggest week they've had all year. And obviously some of them have already taken a loss, so obviously this week just got even bigger for a lot of them. But you got Texas playing OU, their first big time, or their biggest test of the year, in my opinion. I think Michigan's right up there as well. And then you got Ohio State, by far their biggest test of the year, going over to Oregon. Penn State, their biggest test of the year, playing USC. So it's going to be incredible to watch these teams. And frankly, I think whoever can keep their head on straight, whoever can make the play in front of them, whoever cannot get outside of themselves, is probably going to feel pretty good when they wake up on Monday. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, let's just get into some questions we have coming into this week. One of the bigger ones I have is this a perfect slate? And I'll break it down exactly what I mean right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those top 10 teams, a lot of people facing their biggest test of the season, and a lot of people facing by far their biggest test of the season. So it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold, and definitely a lot of people with some big time pressure on them. But let's get into some questions as we head into week 7. I think when we talk about this week, it's as good as it gets. There's no two ways about that, but with that comes just a little bit of confusion. But we'll start with a very nice thing. Is this the perfect slate to break down a college football Saturday? And I think there's a number of things that play into this. Obviously, the games are as good as it gets. There's no two ways about that. You have marquee matchups, you have elite rivalries, you have storylines for days in this week, so plenty of things to break down. But I think the structure of it is absolutely incredible. You talk about the noon slot, not necessarily elite. You don't have that incredible matchup in the noon slot that sometimes you do have, and you would have had a year ago with Texas OU, but you do get Bama. You do get a couple of teams that are going to be on full display, and I very much want to see them on full display. And I don't know if people share this with me, but I kind of like when that noon slot is a little bit lighter, kind of eases me into the day just a little bit, and then the 3:30 slot just punches you in the teeth, and that's exactly what it's going to do. Texas OU, Penn State, USC, special. It's going to be incredible to watch those two games go down to the wire and play right side by side each other, and frankly, it would be the best two games side by side each other in the entire year if the 7:30 slate didn't roll around, frankly, because then you got Ohio State, Oregon, then you got Ole Miss, LSU, and frankly, I don't think you can possibly dream up two better games to be side by side unless you put Texas, Georgia on this weekend. But at the end of the day, we'll have to wait one more week for that one. It's going to be incredible. I think start to finish, you have so many different things to focus on. You can worry about Alabama at noon and make sure they're the team that we thought they were. Then at 3:30, you really get get to work. You get Texas OU, you get Penn State, USC, just elite games all over the place. And then the night slate is as elite as it possibly could get, with Oregon, Ohio State, Ole Miss, LSU, and then just for fun, Kansas State and Colorado kick off at 10:15. So it's about as good as you could possibly get. You're going to get football all over the place, get to ease yourself into it just a little bit with that noon slate, and then it gets really going at 3:30. I also want to talk about who is the underrated, or what is the underrated, under the radar game of the week, because we talk about all of the marquee games. We know about those. We don't need to necessarily break those down anymore, but the reality is there's a lot of other games that frankly probably wouldn't be under the radar in most weekends, but in this one it very much is. And the first one I want to talk about is Cal at Pitt. This is a very fun game. Two teams that have really, really fun offenses, two quarterbacks that have every ability to make some big time plays, and I think the travel factor is going to play a part here. But Cal has a lot of energy after that game that they probably feel like was stolen from them. They're very much wanting to get back on the football field and prove their point, especially against an undefeated team like Pitt. So it's going to be incredible to watch this one. Definitely one that we'll break down in a little bit more complete terms in a day or two. But at the end of the day, cannot wait for this one to get going. Another one that probably shouldn't be under the radar, but is Arizona heading up to Provo to play BYU. This is going to be a huge game for the Big 12, and if Arizona wins it, the Big 12 takes another crazy turn when I think we all know it's going to be absolutely off the charts. And then you have another one. If BYU gets the win here, they're rolling right along. They're absolutely the top team in that conference. And then you have an elite quarterback matchup in this one. Two very different quarterbacks in Jake Retzlaff for BYU and Noah Fafita for Arizona, but a really fun one nonetheless. And then finally, another one that probably wouldn't be under the radar, but it is Iowa State heading over to West Virginia. Iowa State's been playing as good of football as really anyone in the Big 12 right about now, and West Virginia is running the ball incredibly right about now. I believe had 389 yards a week ago against Oklahoma State, so very much need to figure this out. And I think if Iowa State wins it, they probably have a pretty good hole in this conference, along with BYU possibly if they get that win. And then for West Virginia, you win this one, you might be on a little bit of a Cinderella run in the Big 12 going forward. The other thing I want to talk about is who needs to make the biggest statement this upcoming weekend. Who is the coach, who is the player, whatever, that needs to, show who they are in this weekend. Frankly, we're going to break down a lot of coaches because that's where a lot of the pressure is held this upcoming weekend. And Steve Sarkisian is one of the big-time names. He got beat in this game probably because of him last year. There were a number of different things that he could have done in that game to give them a better shot. Didn't necessarily do that. He needs to be able to show up in this game. And then Brent Venables, you got to show you're one of the best defensive minds in the sport. You did a really good job early on in that game last year. You're going to have a lot of that this upcoming day because I think this offense for Texas is even more dangerous than it was a year ago. Then Ryan Day. I don't think this one has to be said very much, but the reality is Ryan Day, whenever he walks on that field with an Oregon, with a Penn State, with a Michigan, he is on a display. He is under a microscope probably more than pretty much anyone else in the country this upcoming weekend. And then Dan Lanning is another one. Absolutely has to get that big-time win. This is a place where he has missed the mark a little bit in the past, and this would be the place that he takes that next step as a head coach. And then there's James Franklin. I can't even imagine what he's going through this week because the reality is this is the game that he will be defined by. These are the games that Penn State will make their decision on. If they want to fire him in a couple of years or if they don't, they will look back at a USC game. They will look back to an Ohio State game, a Michigan game, an Oregon game to figure out if they should or not. You got to execute. You got to play really, really good football. You got to make sure that your defense is playing lights out against this elite offense. And then on the other side, Lincoln Riley is about to fall to 500, 3-4 in 3 or 4 losses in his last 4 games. Badly needs to win this one. So both those quarterbacks are under pressure. I don't know if anyone's under more pressure this weekend than James Franklin going into a really tough environment, or not that all tough environment, a really tough team that he's playing on the other side and very much needs to execute in these big-time games. Let's go down to the group of 5 here for a second because we'll talk about the Power 4 games. No two ways about that, but there's some big-time group of 5 matchups throughout this weekend. One that I'm watching on Friday is UNLV-Utah State. There's a UNLV team that just came off their first loss of the season. Hajj Malik Williams making his 3rd start. There could be a world where they have a little bit of a hangover after that game, feel a little bit down on themselves, and get got in this one. Now, Utah State's not necessarily the team that's going to really force a lot of issues for UNLV, but the reality is we'll see what UNLV is really made of after that loss to Syracuse, and for Utah State, you could shock the world in this one. No two ways about that. San Jose State, Colorado State is a huge one in the Mountain West this upcoming weekend as well. San Jose State has played them in a position to win to get in the CFP. They very much have played elite football on defense. They've done such a good job keeping everything in front of them and just making the plays that they very much need to make. Did a great job hiring their head coach. I think it's just a really, really good team right about now, and they got plenty of places to prove it, but this weekend they're very much going to have to get this win. And then we got Northern Illinois Bowling Green. Frankly, this is a lot just to do with the players that are going to be on that field because Ontario Brown, the running back for Northern Illinois, is downright special. Harold Fannin, as far as I'm concerned, is the very best tight end in the entire country. This is a really, really fun game. And frankly, I think both these teams have an ability to win the MAC. They're probably not winning it if they don't win this one. So I love this Bowling Green team. I'd probably lean them in this game. But at the end of the day, going to be really, really fun to watch this one unfold. And then we got to talk about the Heisman race. Who's the player, who's the team who's the player that can find their way into the Heisman race, back into the Heisman race, or into it for the first time this year? Quinn Ewers is the name that I would watch. And really, this kind of over the next 2 weeks when they play Oklahoma and Georgia, and then play Vanderbilt right after that. But the reality is, I do think this is a player that, if he puts up elite numbers, if Texas wins those 2 games, he's going to be towards the top of the odds. I feel very, very good about that. Now, whether or not he should be with the 2 missed games, we can talk about that, to be totally fair. But the reality is, you talk about elite players around him, elite team that's going to win a lot of games, and elite quarterback. Quinn Ewers checks all those boxes. He absolutely can be in the Heisman race going down the stretch, and frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if he wasn't. This is an absolutely elite player, and as long as he is on the field, this offense runs incredibly, incredibly well, and he's as good as it gets in the entire country. I feel very good about that, and going to be one of those players that, if he puts up crazy numbers against an Oklahoma defense and then a Georgia defense, he will get the attention of a lot of people, and some people that shouldn't have a vote on the Heisman, but that's a totally different conversation for a different day. Jackson Dart's the other one. You have an LSU defense that you can attack. You know that. There's no two ways about that. And you have a lot of playmakers on the outside, even without Trey Harris, which is something they have to figure out offensively anyway. They have to find other guys, and they have other guys to find. Caden Prescorn, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells. They have so many different guys that can make plays on this offense. Jackson Dart's got to be at the center of it. And frankly, even in the South Carolina game, he played good football. Didn't necessarily play the football that he is more than capable of playing and will need to play if he wants to win the Heisman this year. So it's one of those things that he's been a little bit off the radar for the last couple of weeks, has dropped a little bit in the odds. He gets a big win here and puts up crazy numbers. He is right back up to the top. I feel very confident in that. And frankly, I think this next one's interesting. Dillon Gabriel has not really been in this conversation this year, and some of it is totally fair. You know, he hasn't necessarily played elite football. There's been a number of things that he just hasn't done all that well, and he's going to have to play really good on Saturday if they're going to want to get that win. That being said, this is the quarterback for Oregon. This is the guy that's playing in the biggest matchup maybe of the year thus far, and definitely of the week. If he puts up really good numbers, if he leads them to a win at home, he's going to be in the Heisman conversation. This is a very, very good player. Not necessarily the guy that's going to push it downfield the same way Bo Nix did, but he can execute an offense really, really well. So if Gabriel puts up big numbers and gets the win, I feel pretty confident he'll be top 7, top 5 in the odds on Monday. And then the other guy I want to watch is Jeremiah Smith. I think this is a guy that probably on the outside looking in just a little bit, but you look at a couple of the wide receivers that have been able to win this in the past. Tends to go with a quarterback that's not going to put up crazy numbers, or a quarterback that is not necessarily, or is going to lean on that wide receiver a ton. Jeremiah Smith can absolutely do that. If he goes for 2 scores, 100 yards in this game, he could be the guy that's in the top 5 of those odds going forward, and definitely a really interesting player to watch. I'd be a little bit surprised if either of those guys made that jump this upcoming weekend, but at the end of the day, when you play a defense like Ohio State, and if Dillon Gabriel is able to execute at a high level, you probably have to talk about him, right? Then what's the biggest individual matchup of the week? And this isn't necessarily the games themselves, but position group on position group, coach on coach, play caller on play caller, whatever have you. What is the biggest one of this weekend? Ole Miss, or LSU's offensive line against Ole Miss's D-line is probably one of the biggest ones. LSU's offense is absolutely incredible. If Garrett Nussmeier isn't upright, they got no shot. If they're able to move him off the spot, Ole Miss that is, if they're able to move Garrett Nussmeier off the spot, it's going to be really tough for this offense to really get going. So that Ole Miss defensive line is going to have a ton on their plate and definitely going to want to get to this quarterback. And then that LSU offensive line is as good as it possibly gets in the country. So you're very much going to need to bring your A game and play elite football. And if they do, the way that they have the rest of the season, it's going to be really fun to watch this one unfold. The other thing I'm watching is this Oregon wide receiver group against this Buckeye back end, because, man, it is as elite of a matchup as you will find the entirety of the year. It is as good as it possibly gets. Denzel Burke, Caleb Downs, you have Davison Igmanosin, you have Lathan Ransom, you have Jordan Hancock, Jermaine Matthews. It's ridiculous how good that back end is, frankly. But at the end of the day, on the other side, you have Tez Johnson, you have Evan Stewart, you have Jerrion Dickey. You have so many guys that are going to cause problems for you. So it's good on good. It's iron on iron, and we'll figure out who's a little bit better. I genuinely can't get a beat on it. I think Oregon could have the best wide receiver core in the country. I know pretty comfortably that Ohio State has the best back end in the country. So it's going to be really, really fun to watch that one unfold. The one I love the most is these two guys. These are 2 of the best play callers in the entire country, regardless of the side of the ball that you're playing on. But Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables, the fact that we get that every single year is insane. These are 2 incredible play callers, and 2 guys that are they're going to be playing a chess match on Saturday. It's going to be so much fun to watch. Steve Sarkisian, for my money, is the best offensive play caller in the country. Brent Venables, if you have him anywhere lower than top 5 in defensive play calls, you're absolutely wrong. So it's going to be incredible to watch this one unfold, an absolute chess match, and whoever wins it will win this game. I feel very confident in that, so cannot wait to see that one unfold. It's a crazy week. There's no two ways about that. We'll get into the Ohio State-Oregon game as well as the Penn State-USC game tomorrow, a little bit more detail, and we'll get into all the other craziness. There's a million different games to break down, and we'll get to all of them tomorrow, so definitely tune in for that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really great people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.